The SCP Foundation has a long history of experience with humanoid anomalies, from simple reality benders like SCP-239 to strange transplants from other universes like SCP-2273. But one of the oldest, strangest, and most lethal humanoid anomalies in the Foundation's considerable cabinet isn't a superhuman or a soldier. It is a man known only as Herr Chirurg. On first glance, SCP-542's containment protocol is seemingly standard. He is allowed to request personal items and furniture for his cell, so long as they are blunt and cannot be used to cut skin. Reasonable enough, and many such requests have been granted. The ones denied include nail files, clippers, and a surgery kit which has been set aside for testing only. But continuing, SCP-542 requires some special attention too. A blood transfusion every week on request, and even an organ transplant conducted by Foundation doctors should any of his own organs begin to fail. SCP-542 offers to do the surgery himself, but is repeatedly denied. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, we must look back through time to several years before SCP-542's containment. Over the past 3 years, there have been a violent string of murders across America, England, and Germany. Interpol and the FBI are stumped, not only by the wide range of attacks, anywhere from 45 to 60 murders across 3 countries, but by the brutal nature of the attacks. The victims were found in various states of disassembly, body parts missing and tissue removed. They set up crime scenes and conducted complex investigations, but they were simply unable to find their man. In 1 month, 4 people in Germany were assaulted, with the muscle, tissue, and bone removed from all of their limbs. 3 of them died from their injuries before help could arrive, and the 4th was an American woman staying at a shady German hotel. The only reason she narrowly survived the horrific attack was because of the actions of her neighbor, a Foundation agent passing through town. He heard sounds of fighting in the room next door at 3 in the morning and broke down the door to help, unaware of the horrific scene he would find. A huge, misshapen man best described as a Frankenstein's monster. His skin was a patchwork of different shades stitched and grafted together. His chest was sunken in, his arms were grotesquely long for his body, and his face was skeletal and gaunt. This creature, that would come to be named SCP-542, was hunched over the fully conscious woman, vivisecting her leg to remove the sinew and bone. In shock, the agent pulled his weapon and fired at the creature, which escaped through the window unharmed. The authorities were called, and the woman survived, although without her right leg. Just before being amnesticized, the woman provided a statement to the Foundation. She had been staying in Germany for a few days when she saw a strange man on her usual bus one day. Even though it was summer, the man was draped and wrapped in layers of heavy coats, jackets, and a hat. Though his face completely obscured, the woman could tell he was staring at her from the back of the bus. Thinking it was just some creep, she ignored him and got off at her stop. For 3 days, she continued to take the bus and ignore the strange man sitting in the back. Then, on the 4th day, when she got off the bus that night and went to her hotel room, she found the window open and the lights off, and assumed she had been burglarized. But as soon as she opened the door, she realized she wasn't alone. 2 freakishly long arms with disjointed hands grabbed her ankles from under the bed and brought her crashing to the floor. Before she knew what was happening, she was tied to the bed, and the hulking hunchback was retrieving a surgical set and sharpening his knives and tools. Fearing the worst, she began to scream, and the agent heard her. But by the time he broke in and shot his weapon, the creature had already done too much damage to her leg. The victim was amnesticized and told her leg had been amputated in a car crash. The Foundation took over the investigation from Interpol, realizing this wasn't some regular serial killer. This was a creature, a predator, and to find it, they had to hunt SCP-542 like a predator. After a long tracking and manhunt across Europe, SCP-542 was brought into Foundation custody, and research into this creature could begin. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, the researchers were expecting an animal or a monster, something they could study and dissect, which is why they were so shocked when the monster began speaking in tongues. German, French, Polish, before settling on English. all in a sharp German accent. The beast was introducing itself, Herr Chirurg, German for Mr. Surgeon. Preliminary investigations revealing much about SCP-542 and confirmed the agent's initial impression was correct. Herr Chirurg is a modern Frankenstein's monster. His anatomy has been warped and malformed, as the agent observed. His skin is a patchwork of large chunks of skin grafted or sewn to each other, no two of which seem to come from the same person. His ribcage is warped and twisted, with all the ribs jutting out in different directions, and both his arms are different sizes, though both are incredibly muscular and far too long for his body. Attached to each is a hand, but filled with far more joints than any normal hand, allowing him to bend his fingers in almost any direction. His spine is hunched and twisted like a snake, and the skin stretched tight over his skull reveals a sunken cranium and a mouth with far, far too many teeth, none of them from the same source, and not all of them human. And these are all simply the externally obvious and most grotesque modifications. Foundation staff have conducted intense medical research, ranging from X-rays to comprehensive DNA testing. SCP-542's bone and muscle structures are asymmetrical, revealing the left and right sides of his body come from different sources. In fact, they reveal that almost all of his organs and body parts have been replaced with other body parts from different sources. His DNA is heavily fragmented beyond all logic. By any reasonable measure, SCP-542 should have died a long time ago. Instead, he is able to accept many blood types and organ transplants without so much as discomfort, much less the serious autoimmune response that any normal person would get. Not to mention, he is able to stay perfectly aware even while performing complex brain surgery on himself. Herr Chirurg's history is as enigmatic and mysterious as the question of how he remains alive. He claims he was once a simple doctor from Germany, dreadfully normal until the Great War began. The Foundation has deduced this to mean that he began his modifications to his body between the world wars. But it appears Herr Chirurg wasn't just a monster on the outside. He claims to have worked for the Nazis in World War II as they conducted brutal human experimentation, which he described as boring. The exact nature and timeline of how he modified himself without dying at some point is similarly mysterious. He professes that he didn't work alone. For more complex surgeries, such as implanting his second heart or replacing parts of his spinal cord, he had a team of helpers. Who and where these surgical assistants are now is a mystery, if they're even alive. After all, the Foundation has ample evidence Herr Chirurg is able and willing to kill people for their parts. After all this exhaustive research on SCP-542, you'd be forgiven for thinking that he is some kind of mad scientist, driven insane by his experimentation on his own body. While no one can answer why Chirurg kills except himself, he is almost frighteningly sane. This hulking monstrosity enjoys reading his anatomy textbooks, which he requests on a regular basis, along with filling out crossword puzzles in German. He's friendly too, described as surprisingly pleasant by the research team. He holds long, intellectual conversations on topics ranging from science and biology and medicine to politics and history, which he seems to recount with startling accuracy. In fact, tissue testing has failed to return a definitive age for the surgeon. He's incredibly skilled at the game of chess, and the research team is allowed to play with him as a method of interview. SCP-542 displays fluency in a variety of European languages, though he prefers his supposedly native German. At first, the research team was enthused with his presence, even if he was a little terrifying. Having a brilliant doctor to converse with was a great distraction for them. His ability to heal from intense surgery with almost no organ rejection or allergic reactions was considered a medical miracle. And rather than locking him up and throwing away the key, the research team decided to use him to try and harness this incredible power for modern medicine. His books and notes captured along with him reveal surgical techniques and methods far more advanced than considered possible when they were written. For his part, SCP-542 was happy to comply. He enjoyed performing surgery on himself with an audience, using himself as a living cadaver to explain his manner of surgery and the functions of the body. Unfortunately, observing him this close carried a risk none of the researchers realized until it was too late. You see, Herr Chirurg isn't just a friendly old surgeon. His body runs off second-hand parts and is constantly failing. Organs stop functioning, blood flow ceases. Parts of his body grow gangrenous and necrotic. SCP-542 is able to anomalously detect when this is happening. He is perfectly and acutely aware of his own bodily functions like digestion and peristalsis, and he knows exactly when one of his organs is starting to give up or his flesh is beginning to decay. When this happens, the surgeon undergoes a drastic transformation. His pleasant exterior evaporates. He grows moody and withdrawn, snapping at people and avoiding conversation. He spends long periods of time observing people, using his ability to sense how well their body is. And then when he senses an opening, he strikes. Just like his murders in Europe, he picks the body of his victims clean of their body parts he needs and lets them die of blood loss. Then he performs the surgery to replace his own failing organs with the new ones, and returns to his usual demeanor. This monstrous Jekyll-Hyde relationship isn't purely need-based either. The research team has discovered that Herr Chirurg will also dissect people simply for the joy of the act. In one regrettable incident, a sewing kit was left behind in this cell. Several hours later, guards discovered a D-class sewn to the mattress in SCP-542's cell, with the surgeon carefully and gleefully extracting his organs. SCP-542 Herr Chirurg is a walking encyclopedia of medical and surgical knowledge, but all that knowledge comes from experimentation on himself and on unwilling victims. The Foundation has put him to use in certain projects, but all activity with him is to be strictly monitored and regulated. Despite appearances, SCP-542 isn't a person. He is a predator, and an exceptionally skilled and dangerous one at that. One moment of inattentiveness can result in a fate much worse than death around him. But you can rest assured that if something does happen, your parts won't go to waste. Researchers at Foundation Site-202 were going about their day as they would normally, or as normal as a day could be in the SCP Foundation. If anything, normality was abnormal for them. It was a quiet day at Site-202, as it had been for a few weeks, to the distress of many of the researchers stationed at the site. No anomalies had breached containment in the past 20 days. There were no random anomalous events to investigate. Testing was up to date for all anomalies they had contained in the past few months, and their leads on potential anomalies had run dry. There was little to do at Site-202, and its researchers grew restless as the piles and piles of boring Foundation paperwork grew even taller. That was until a fateful day in the spring of 1990. It was March 22nd. The cold winter weather had still lingered in the air that day, but it was warming up for all the people living around the site. There was word that a school not too far from SCP-202 was experiencing an event that could only be described as potentially catastrophic to the SCP Foundation's reality. Of the researchers at Site-202, 5 were deemed suitable to form a temporary task force. The first, Dr. J. Alfred Henry, a senior researcher who was a former member of the mobile task force, the Mole Rats, during the investigation into SCP-1730, the interdimensional Site-13. Dr. Henry also brought along his assistant, researcher Tyler Zeisman. The next member was Yavan Olik, who was in charge of taking care of any living anomalies that may be present at the location. Another member of this team was Sprigend Firestarter, a former member of the anomalous group of interest, the Serpent's Hand, which specializes in magic and spellcasting. This project was overseen by Samantha Streisand, the director of Site-202. The team was not given a normal designation as most task forces are, a Greek letter and a number. Instead, they were called the Taint Team, and were in charge of documenting and combating any and all parts of reality that were tainted by the anomaly. The team set out for the location of this potential anomaly, along with their standard issue firearms and tactical armor. They were armed with the portable Scranton reality anchors and possibly the most important part of their arsenal, their expertise. The location the Taint Team arrived at was nothing they were expecting from what they had heard about past reality-altering anomalies. They were greeted with a single school building. It was large in size, more a castle than a school. It was constructed out of red bricks, with the roofs being slanted and white. In the center of the building complex was a large clock tower. The researchers commented how similar it looked to a nearby church and continued inside. They moved throughout the school, looking around for any sign of abnormalities. There were 3 floors and 2 wings, but all of them housed no anomaly. The portable Scranton reality anchors each member of the Taint team held were not picking up on any levels of reality instability. They were close to calling the investigation a false positive and moved back to Site 202 when a faint beeping noise was heard from all of the members of personnel. Dr. Olick was the only one not to react to the sound out of the team. "It's just a meat processing plant," he said sternly. "There's nothing here except empty rooms and dust. Let's just head back." The rest of the team was confused. A meat processing plant? They were all briefed numerous times that this was a school. Olick was the first one to comment that he recognized the location. Was this the reality-altering anomaly they were looking for? A school that made people think it's a meat processing plant? That wouldn't be the weirdest anomaly the Foundation has found. One side had a Yeti working for them. But this was rather underwhelming. "What do you mean a meat processing plant?" inquired Dr. Henry. "Whatever, let's just go," Olick responded coldly. Dr. Henry stopped him as he turned and looked into his portable reality anchor. There was a rise in Humes on the other side of the main corridor on the first floor. Humes are a unit of reality stability. Baseline reality is located at a Hume level of 0. Anything or anyone with a Hume level greater than that is able to affect reality in various ways. The team moved slowly to the other side of this room, once again finding nothing except the white drywall and tile flooring of the building. There was one odd element as they approached this portion though. A door. It was not like any of the heavy steel doors the team had seen in the building. It was wooden, like the one you'd see on a house. The Hume reader skyrocketed. It was a number they had never seen before. 4,000 Humes. After a 10-second of looking at each other on what their next move should be, Dr. Henry slowly reached his hand out to the door and twisted the bronze handle as the rest of the team drew their weapons. He opened it quickly, finding nothing but a dusty staircase. The Hume reader plummeted back to normal levels as quickly as it had spiked. The team discussed what they should do next. They decided to enter the basement level, which they found was not listed on the floor plan of the building. Dr. Olick insisted, however, that he remembered this meat processing plant having a basement. They moved into the dark stairway and slowly progressed down the stairs. It was an oddly short staircase that led to an oddly small room. The team was once again confused. Why did the Hume level hit a record high if there was nothing but a small boiler and a few pipes snaking out onto the walls? Dr. Olick was notably absent from the team. After some searching, he was found a bit up the flight of stairs, frozen in place with fear. "Yvonne!" Dr. Henry called. "What's wrong?" There was no response, as Dr. Olick just stood there frozen in shock. Then suddenly, the silent doctor began to walk down the steps almost robotically. His eyes were locked onto the boiler, but it didn't look like anything was wrong with it to the eyes of everyone else. Dr. Olick entered the room with the rest of the team and moved towards the boiler. "You don't see it?" Olick said. The veins." "What are you talking about?" Dr. Henry responded. "There's nothing wrong here." Researcher Zeisman moved towards Dr. Olick in an attempt to calm him down. As he approached, Dr. Olick became hostile and began fighting the researcher. The other members of the Taint team attempted to calm and restrain the doctor, but Olick thwarted these attempts and moved to the corner. "Blood!" Olick cried. "He wants blood! A lot of blood!" Dr. Henry began frantically radioing Director Streisand in an attempt to get more help, but as he did, Olick cried out the word blood another time. A gunshot rang out. His body fell to the ground, but his blood did not. The blood of Dr. Olick began flowing up the walls in a jagged pattern, then began to absorb into the concrete. Suddenly, the Hume level spiked in the room, and the blaring alarms of the portable reality anchors were all that could be heard. The room switched in appearance. Attached to all 4 walls on the basement were hundreds of long, thick veins. They were red and black and purple, and dripped a syrupy liquid of the same color onto the ground. There was almost a foot of the liquid in the room, which the agents had been standing in without even knowing it. There was a mass slithering towards the corpse of Dr. Olick. It was black and a deep red in color. It almost looked like a person, but it didn't move or act like one. The entity absorbed the body of Dr. Olick into its central mass and began moving towards the remaining members of the Taint team. The Foundation personnel yelled into their walkies that they needed to be evacuated immediately. They sprinted up the stairs toward the roof and out of the building. Just as they reached the rooftop, they heard a terrifying guttural rumbling voice mutter the word, Their reality anchor's Hume readers then plummeted back to normal levels, and a Foundation helicopter arrived to evacuate them from the rooftop. The Foundation would designate this anomaly as SCP-5633. They devised a number of containment procedures to combat the anomaly. Site-202 was to be used as a drainage facility for the anomaly's secretions, and all personnel who enter the basement of SCP-5633 must not have a phobia of blood. As with most anomalies, the SCP Foundation personnel of Site-202 decided to conduct testing under the belief that SCP-5633 could speak to them again. Blood used for transfusions at the Foundation was transported from Site-17 for the Taint team to use as bait to attempt an interview. It has been over a month since the Taint team had been to SCP-5633. They remained with 3 members despite losing 1 to the anomaly, as they were all familiar enough with the building. Dr. Henry placed down a bag of blood and readied his reality anchor. Immediately, the blood was drained out of the bag and began to flow up the walls of the basement. As Hume levels spiked, the room revealed its true form. The humanoid entity responded.
I am glad you know what to do.
Another bag was placed down.
You are now part of my creation.
It was decided that 2 bags would be placed next. Dr. Henry believed that more blood would potentially get a greater result.
You should follow every instruction I give you. You should give me blood each time, or I will stop giving you instructions.
Another 2 bags of blood were placed down, but this time no phrase was given from SCP-5633. Instead, a bundle of papers fell from one of the veins. It depicted the blueprints for Site-202. Whether this was a threat or a message, it did not matter to the personnel at Site-202 that was overseeing the project. They commanded that all of the Taint team were to return to base at once. While the SCP Foundation has ways to combat reality-altering events, they also have methods to look at alternate realities. As SCP-5633 is one of these reality-bending anomalies, it was decided a much more in-depth investigation was needed. It was found that in an alternate timeline, SCP-5633 was a meat processing plant that suffered a reality alteration. The Taint team in that reality had been trapped in the meat processing plant, only to fight and destroy SCP-5633. Somehow they were able to disconnect SCP-5633's control on them and the meat processing plant. Then overseeing researchers were able to attach SCP-5633 to various realities that were different from its own. It became confused and destroyed itself. Did the SCP Foundation of another reality accidentally send SCP-5633 to this reality? It seems that way. So perhaps this version of the SCP Foundation could contain it by sending it to another reality. Perhaps one that it didn't have power in it at all. The Taint team decided that this was the course of action they would take. They reviewed the file they had recovered from the servers of an alternate reality, finding that blood was the correct sacrifice to give to SCP-5633. There was an issue though. The humanoid entity within SCP-5633 had been growing larger, along with its already intense power. Tests were being run on the substance found in the basement, as Site-202 had been draining and pumping it into a disposal and storage laboratory. It was found to be a mixture of blood and DNA from over 2,000 different human sources. There was a catastrophic accident with one of the drainage pipes in Site-202. One had been heated to intense temperatures, causing a potential meltdown of the entire site. On-site security and repair teams moved in swiftly to combat the issue. However, the superheating and rapid flooding led to the pipe bursting from shock, splattering everyone in its vicinity with SCP-5633's fluid. The fluid acted almost as an acid, burning away armor, clothes, skin, and muscle tissue, and embedded itself into the bodies of the victims. They were immediately placed into temporary containment, as at the time, it was unknown what would happen when the liquid entered the bloodstream. As always, tests were performed on the wounded. They found that the entirety of the DNA of those who had been victims of the liquid was instead reading as SCP-5633's DNA, not their own. For the time, the victims seemed fine. That was until a week later, when all the victims of this event were found dead in their cells, with cuts on their wrists and throats. Logically, this would be the most efficient way to drain the most amount of blood out of their bodies in the shortest period of time. The oddest part of this entire ordeal, there was no blood pooled on the ground whatsoever. There were only faintly red trails of blood up the walls of each cell. That same day, SCP-5633 was observed to have grown over twice in size. If the anomaly could affect people who are not even in the room, what's preventing it from spreading this liquid to all corners of the Earth and draining all of the human race's blood into its own mass? The Taint team was given a supply of blood to draw SCP-5633 out, so that reality anchors could be placed and it could be sent to another reality. The plan was simple, with Dr. Henry and researcher Zeissman placing the blood bags down and communicating with the entity. Firestarter would place down 3 portable Scranton reality anchors to contain the entity for a time. The Taint team journeyed to SCP-5633, this time accompanied by Director Streisand. The site director believed that all the deaths caused by SCP-5633 were at her hand, as she had more than enough time to intervene, but didn't. This time she was ready to send this anomaly out of her reality by any means necessary. The brick wall of the school had gone from a nostalgic reminder of elementary school to a nightmare of dead colleagues and the potential death of reality. They were careful when they entered, despite knowing SCP-5633 was located in the basement. Everyone on the team was tense, but they knew they had a mission in mind. They were ready to die in the dark, if that meant everyone could live in the light. With a swift hand, Dr. Henry opened the door to the basement, and the 3 other members of the Taint team followed suit. The basement once again appeared to be normal. The team knew this was a false sense of security put in place by SCP-5633, so it could coil around them and drain their blood so it could grow in size and power. The first bag of blood was placed down, and the Taint team was met with the voice of SCP-5633.
I like to lie.
The Taint team was perplexed as the bag began to be drained of blood. What did SCP-5633 lie about? Another bag was placed on the ground, and Firestarter was commanded to wait.
My creation was always inherent. Your assistance was never necessary. I told you, if you helped me, you would be saved.
Dr. Henry, in a fit of confusion and rage, threw the rest of the bags to the ground. The only response he was given,
I am lying to you.
Suddenly, the Hume levels in the room spiked to 4,000. The room changed appearance again. Now, the Taint team was almost drowning in SCP-5633's liquid. They tried to scream, but were only met with mouthfuls of the disgusting black and red mixture. As fast as the liquid appeared, it was gone, and so was the team. There was nothing but silence and the soft sound of slithering. Personnel at Site-202 realized about 1 hour later that something must have gone wrong with this investigation, and hastily traveled to SCP-5633. Over 50 members of various mobile task forces and security teams entered the school and its basement, only to be met with the disgustingly cruel fate of the Taint team. SCP-5633 had reached a height of almost 20 feet. Dr. Henry's left arm and nose were seen floating in the middle of this mass. Half of Agent Firestarter's face was seen jutting out of what appeared to be the shoulder of SCP-5633. The legs of researcher Zeissman were found at the lower portion of the entity, laying completely still other than randomly twitching. The head of Director Streisand was peeking out of the top of SCP-5633. Her eyes had been completely replaced with SCP-5633's veins, and she appeared to be crying the liquid constantly. It seemed that SCP-5633 had been influencing events from the beginning, from the death of Dr. Olick to the pipe explosion, to possibly even creating the entire narrative of being kicked out of another universe by an alternate Foundation. The SCP Foundation does know one thing for sure though. SCP-5633 requires a great amount of blood, and it just so happens human beings have a lot of it. Why do so many of the indigenous cultures of the colder regions of North America seem to share the same legend? a legend that tells of a monster that lurks in the forests, bringing cold and death to any that meet it. This creature is an omen of famine, a territorial beast that preys on human beings. Some cultures describe it as an unholy abomination, a spirit of winter, and a warning against the dangers of selfishness, one that is created whenever a person resorts to cannibalism in order to survive. It will gladly devour any man, woman, or child that wanders into its territory, holding a horrifying and insatiable hunger for human flesh. So how did so many cultures end up with the same story? Could it be because it's real? Depictions of the beast vary, but it is most commonly recognized by its tall skeletal form, like a body exhumed from the grave, even carrying the stench of death and decay with it. Anyone who encounters one risks being eaten or transformed into a creature just like it. The monster's name means an evil spirit that devours mankind, though to even say the name is taboo, as it's believed to give power to the beast. Of course, these are all just legends, right? Stories to warn against the dangers of greed and selfishness, but otherwise nothing to fear. There's no proof that such a beast could actually be roaming the frozen wastes. Many at the SCP Foundation felt the same way, until they heard about SCP-323, the Wendigo's skull. Kept under lock and key by the Foundation with around-the-clock surveillance, SCP-323 is an anomalous object with ties to the various Wendigo legends. As the object's moniker suggests, SCP-323 is a skull, not a human skull, mind you. It more closely resembles a cervid skull. Cervids are a family of mammals that include most varieties of deer, elk, and other similar animals, and this particular cervid skull sports a tall pair of antlers. SCP-323 is definitely not a fresh skull either. It shows signs of weathering and a few scars across the surface, looking as if the bone has been bleached and eroded through exposure to the elements. The skull is also missing its lower jaw, and has a sizable hole on the rear underside that may have been carved using stone tools. SCP-323 is kept restrained inside an armored container within a concrete containment cell, and personnel are only ever allowed near it to check the restraints for signs of damage. Additionally, any Foundation staff that enter SCP-323's cell must be accompanied by an armed security officer, and in the event of a containment breach, the entire site is to be evacuated. Seems like a lot of precautions and safety measures for an old piece of bone. Surely a harmless deer skull could never be that dangerous, right? Wrong. You might be forgiven for thinking that a skull can't possibly cause harm. After all, SCP-323 is just a skull, then whatever animal it belonged to is dead. But this skull is far more than it appears to be. Through extensive testing, the SCP Foundation's researchers have learned that the skull isn't dead. No, this skull is awake and aware. It can see, hear, and has a sense of touch, and it can and will react to various stimuli. However, this does not necessarily mean that SCP-323 is alive or even sentient, but it definitely appears to have some level of sapience. It will target certain members of personnel that get too close, and has attempted multiple times to breach containment. It also reacts violently to anyone speaking English or French near it, the only two languages prohibited inside SCP-323's cell. So while the skull is not technically alive, it is definitely aware. Still, why the need for so many protocols to keep it contained? It's not as if a skull can just walk off on its own. Of course not. But SCP-323 can move, at least to a certain degree, often in a reactionary manner. SCP-323 will vibrate or move on its own, for example, turning to watch as personnel enter its containment cell. In most cases, these movements are tiny and insignificant, but other times the skull lunges, launching itself at Foundation personnel as it desperately tries to get free. Now you know why it's kept restrained. So, we have an antlered cervid skull that can move and has a low level of awareness. On their own, these would be more than enough to warrant the Foundation's interest, but the anomalous properties of SCP-323 don't stop there. The skull has an inherent ability to influence the minds of those around it. Anyone spending an hour within a 15-meter radius of SCP-323 is likely to experience the effects of this influential power. This will often result in them exhibiting uncharacteristic behaviors, thoughts, and urges, including cannibalistic tendencies and outbursts of random violence. Almost 3/4 of people that suffer the influence of SCP-323 will feel an overwhelming compulsion to take the Wendigo skull and fit their heads into the chiseled hole on the rear underside. If someone attempting this finds that their head is too big to fit inside the hollow skull, there have been cases of individuals trying to bludgeon their heads on any hard surface they can find nearby in an attempt to get their head down to a more manageable size. This will continue until one of 3 outcomes occurs. 1. The person manages to fit their head into the skull. 2. They cause themselves so much cranial damage that they are rendered unconscious. Or 3. They end up killing themselves through repeated violent head trauma. Of course, if a person actually manages to fit their head inside SCP-323, then that is a different story entirely. In these instances, the individual becomes classified as an instance of SCP-323-1. Within 10 minutes of wearing the skull, this person will suffer dramatic changes to their body. Any and all body fat will be rapidly shed as their hair also begins to fall out, leaving them looking starved and almost skeletal in appearance. Their distal phalanges, those are the bones at the tip of the fingers, will elongate and rupture the skin as they become bony, claw-like appendages. The subject will also find that their teeth have grown abnormally long and sharp, while their limbs will blacken as if they were suffering frostbite symptoms. Along with their external transformations, SCP-323-1 will also get increased strength and heightened resistance to pain. They aren't invulnerable though, and can still sustain damage and injuries. SCP-323 will also have a dramatic change happen to their metabolism, which will occur a few minutes into the physical transformation. The subject will now need an almost constant intake of calories, which if they don't receive, will cause them to starve almost instantly. With the transformation process complete, the new instance of SCP-323-1 has finally become the Wendigo, a terrifying monster with one goal: to feed. The SCP-323 instance will seek out any human beings it can find so that it can feed upon their flesh. Those who have witnessed the 323 instance in the midst of a feeding frenzy have described the way it violently slaughtered any person it could find, leaving only a mess of blood as it devoured them, their screams mixed in with the sounds of bones crunching. In the times that the creature cannot find a human to nourish its monstrous appetite, it will try to keep itself alive any way it can. Sometimes it will slow down its movement to try and conserve energy. Other times it will ration whatever food is available to it, saving some of its last meal for a leftover snack. And on occasion, the monster will engage in auto-cannibalism, a form of cannibalism that involves eating parts of itself. Humans certainly seem to be its preferred food source though. Even when other sources of meat would be easier to acquire, SCP-323-1 will zero in on human beings and will do anything it can to make a person its next meal. When chasing down its prey, human or otherwise, SCP-323-1 has been observed uttering phrases either spoken in the primary language of whoever was transformed by the skull, or in the Severn, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Cree languages. These are all native languages of the numerous indigenous creatures that shared legends of the Wendigo. Where do the phrases come from, though? Are they another side effect of SCP-323's influence? Or do they originate from the skull itself? The Foundation's researchers are still trying to figure that out, and at the moment, they have no clues as to where they come from. In one containment breach in 2006, during which an instance of SCP-323-1 was able to kill and devour 12 members of Foundation personnel, on-site surveillance recorded audio of the creature speaking. It rasped, while dragging a body behind it. After this, the sound of a wet cracking noise was recorded, possibly one of the victim's bones being broken by SCP-323-1 so it could get to the marrow inside. The 323-1 instance does at times seem to try and resist the influence of the Wendigo skull. Additional recordings capture the creature saying, the creature then said, followed by noises of it eating the body. It seems that even the Wendigo has its own internal struggles, perhaps showing that there is still something left of the human who put on the skull, and that deep down they are fighting against their cannibalistic impulses. But where exactly did the Foundation find SCP-323? And is it really the skull of an actual Wendigo, the famous creature from North American legend? In 1997, the SCP Foundation sent a detachment to Bitterron Lake in Saskatchewan, Canada. There had been reports of a local community murdering individuals and leaving their bodies in the forest to appease a dangerous creature residing nearby. This creature, as it was later discovered, was an instance of SCP-323-1. Someone had found the skull and succumbed to its influence, placing it on their head and turning into a monster. Ever since, the locals had been killing people and offering up their dead bodies as sustenance, fearful of what would happen if they didn't, after being brought up with legends of the Wendigo. SCP Foundation agents were able to capture the beast, however it died of starvation while being transported back to containment. They also covered up the recent deaths in the area by giving the local residents amnestics, and creating a cover story about an unidentified serial killer. Prior to this, James Namagoose, a local man who was involved in the murders, was brought in for questioning. He remained oddly calm when interviewed, but admitted he had helped move the bodies that were being offered up as food for SCP-323-1, or as he called it, the Wendigo. According to James, a local story among the Cree people told of men who had once tried to control a Wendigo, and perhaps even tame it through offerings of food. Whether or not James and his fellow locals had the same intention, their primary concern was keeping themselves safe. He described first encountering the creature, a warped man walking out of the woods, killed our friends right in front of us. Sometimes it would stare more than it would make to kill, try to talk to you. It whispered at me, "Pemisto, come and eat." It made me cold in my bones. As the interview continued, James claimed that he felt like he understood this warped man. He described feeling like the Wendigo was encouraging him to kill, that the creature would help him pass when his own time came. James told the Foundation doctor questioning him that he had heard the creature in his mind, and he felt it watching him almost constantly. Mr. Namagoose stated that he hoped in killing people as offerings to the Wendigo, that his own family would be spared. Like the other locals, James Namagoose was given amnestics to forget all about the creature and the murders he'd played a part in committing. So far, none of the Foundation's staff have experienced any similar behavioral effects to those James described. Those who work closely with SCP-323 or have witnessed an instance of SCP-323-1 have felt the creature communicating with them, or urging them to kill on its behalf. Ultimately, who is to say if SCP-323 is the skull of a Wendigo like those from legends? It certainly seems like it is, but with no way to tell exactly how old the skull is. Perhaps it's actually the reverse, and it was the Wendigo legend that spawned from instances of SCP-323-1 that were first encountered by indigenous North American cultures hundreds of years ago. One thing is for certain: if you ever come across a skull with tall antlers, you should try to resist putting it on. Otherwise, you might not be feeling like yourself for much longer. Over the past several years, many of us have learned how incredibly life-threatening and dangerous viruses and diseases can be. They can cause any number of critical symptoms and can shut down your body's processes in a wide variety of ways. But there are more diseases than just the ones we can name off the top of our heads based on recent experience. Many of these have nothing anomalous about them, despite being incredibly strange. Take progeria. It's a genetic condition that causes people carrying a very specific gene mutation to age rapidly. Not twice as fast either. So fast that most victims tragically don't live past their early teens.
Or elephantiasis. If you're thinking that's a disease affecting elephants, you'd be wrong, but not grossly so.
It causes the lymph nodes in your body to stop draining fluid correctly, so it pools up and makes your body parts swell to a massive size, until you look like an elephant. And of course, there's the nasty disease known more commonly as the bone growth disease, or the bone prison syndrome. When most people's muscle cells die, they get a nasty bruise, but no lasting damage. But for people with this rare genetic mutation, dead muscle cells ossify. They turn into bone. And muscle cells die slowly anyway, even if they're not damaged in any way. Over the years, sufferers have had their body gradually turn into solid bone. All strange and terrifying, aren't they? But none of them are anomalies, surprising as it may seem. They're all perfectly real diseases, documented by modern science. You can even search them up and see evidence if you don't believe us. But it begs the question, if these seemingly logic-defying and impossible diseases are just the ones known by modern science, then what kind of diseases break our understanding of science, physics, biology, and chemistry so much that they need to be categorized as anomalous? And, of course, contained by the Foundation. We have a few examples, the most notable of which is SCP-008, the fabled zombie plague, exactly what it sounds like on the tin. But today we're going to be looking at something else entirely. One of the many anomalous biohazards that the Foundation keeps in cold storage deep below the surface of the Earth, to ensure that they're never to infect another human being again. But this one is a little unique. When we talk about dangerous diseases, we always consider the outcome, the most danger a disease could possibly pose, to be death. However, our topic for the day doesn't do that. Frankly, death might be preferable to what it does to you. SCP-2376 has a nickname around the Foundation's medical department. They call it the Scarecrow virus. That name alone raises a lot of questions. Usually diseases are named scientifically or according to the symptoms they give to anyone unlucky enough to be infected by them. But scarecrows aren't dangerous. They're not even alive. The simple little straw effigies that farmers stick in their corn and wheat fields so that crows don't pick their crops clean before they can be harvested. What do scarecrows have to do with a biological threat that the Foundation has decided is dangerous and anomalous enough that it must be contained, lest the wider world learn about it? Well, I suppose the only way to find out is by reading its documentation, which is honestly quite sparse. It's not the massive multi-page Goliaths that many entries can turn into. It's short, it's simple, and perhaps it's better that way. This is one of those cases where the more details you get, the more disturbing the anomaly is. But let's get into it. SCP-2376's object class is Euclid, which is at least a good first sign. It means that it's not too hard to contain, which in the context of a disease means that it's not amazingly communicative or contagious. That's good, all things considered. SCP-008 and SCP-610, by contrast, are incredibly communicative, and that's part of why they can be so hard for the Foundation to contain. The special containment procedures for SCP-2376 are a little odd. In fact, they barely reference SCP-2376 itself. Instead, they mostly refer to SCP-2376-1 instances, and how to care for them, feed them, communicate with them, and so on and so forth. They go into detail that SCP-2376-1 instances can't be fed normally, but by using an automated feeding system to limit human exposure to them. But they still need meticulous care. They have to be examined at least once every 8 hours by Foundation medical staff, and the discomfort that comes as a result of their infections is to be alleviated as much as possible. While precise, they're not exactly surprising. We know it's a disease, so it makes sense that these SCP-2376-1 instances are the victims of the disease, and as they're severely ill, they need to be fed and examined without making their condition, whatever it is, even worse or spreading it to staff. But they go on, and they get stranger. SCP-2376-1 instances can't actually be informed or made aware of the fact that the diseases they're suffering from, SCP-2376, is anomalous for some reason. They cannot be told about the anomalous properties of it. A text-based communicator for the disabled, kind of like the computer voice system used by Stephen Hawking, has to be used to communicate with the instances. But personnel can't just wait for them to type something out. They have to close and reopen their eyes every 5 minutes to see if they've typed anything out. For some reason, either victims of SCP-2376 can't move when they're being looked at, like the infamous SCP-173, or that people can't sense that victims have moved until they close and reopen their eyes. Either way, very anomalous, not to mention the fact that they won't or can't speak. The next line is a very hard, very firm rule though, not just a directive for care. Under absolutely no circumstances are patients to be removed from their rooms or disposed of. No removing from rooms makes sense. You don't want the disease to spread and cross-contaminate with the various other anomalies the Foundation's site has in its halls. Who knows what kind of superbug you might wind up with. But disposal is a different matter. The Foundation isn't allowed to get rid of victims of this disease. That seems obvious. The Foundation doesn't kill people if at all avoidable. Clearly something else is at play here. The next line gives a hint. Personnel have to follow any instructions given to them while treating instances, and have to be regularly reminded that they're treating a human being. Whatever this disease does to people, it causes others to not recognize them as human, and may accidentally dispose of them. All the instances/victims, as well as samples of the disease itself, are located at Site-234, and MTF Beta-7, the Maz Hatters, are to regularly investigate hospitals in the area, with prior infection for repeat instances. Beta-7 is a mobile task force trained and equipped specifically to deal with contagious or infectious anomalies, a cross between soldiers and doctors. SCP-2376 is a substrain of the real-world tetanus virus, which is often called lockjaw. Most people get a tetanus shot in childhood that protects them from the disease, with regular booster shots so they never have to suffer through the grisly infection that's often found on rusty metal.
Lockjaw is called that because the bacteria infects your muscles and makes them violently spasm, locking your jaw muscles into a closed position.
There's no cure, and about 10% of cases are fatal. But the scarecrow virus is different. While tetanus is found on rusty nails, SCP-2376 is zoonotic. It's communicated and carried by animals, specifically the common crow. That sheds some light on the name. While it's carried by crows, it's transmissible to humans too. As we guessed, the unfortunate victims are designated SCP-2376-1 instances by the Foundation. SCP-2376's infection of humans consists of two distinct stages, Stage 1 and Stage 2. Stage 1 is, of course, first, and at first seems mild. It lasts between 1 and 4 weeks and has all the symptoms of the regular tetanus virus, like a fever, spasms, and loss of mobility, but with some extra ones. People also develop a reddish rash across their body, a cough, and vertigo. They become afraid of heights. That would be strange enough, but it also affects the senses. Victims who haven't progressed to Stage 2 yet complain about always smelling the odor of straw, corn, and other materials you'd find on a farm, even when they're nowhere near any farm. They say that everything they touch has a strange sort of film or texture on it, like rough burlap, the kind that you'd find a bag of potatoes to be made of. This is all certainly strange, but it's not something that you'd think must be contained by the Foundation. Just an odd variant of the tetanus virus. But Stage 2 is when things really get complicated. The anomalous properties of the disease become readily apparent after the victim progresses to Stage 2. They stop being perceived as human. Anyone who looks at them only sees a regular, unmoving, inanimate scarecrow. It's not that they become a scarecrow either, just that people can no longer perceive them as anything but, which is arguably worse. Observers don't realize that the person they were looking at just a moment ago is suddenly gone or has been replaced by a scarecrow. To them, everything seems normal. They don't realize or question that anything's wrong. In fact, they can't even perceive any noises an SCP-2376-1 instance makes, like yelling or calling for help. That's why they have to use the text communication. But why the 5-minute delay? Because people can't perceive any motion by SCP-2376-1 instances either, at least not while looking at them. If one runs across the room right in front of an observer, they won't realize it, and will see the scarecrow still sitting where it started. But if they look away by turning around or closing their eyes before making visual contact with it again, the scarecrow will be in the position where the SCP-2376-1 instance stopped moving. The disease doesn't just affect the person who has it. Once Stage 2 sets in, it affects people who don't have it and have no exposure to it, besides looking at a victim. That's why it's anomalous. It manages to change how people's nervous systems and senses act while never even infecting them. SCP-2376 can't infect microphones or motion detectors either, though. Any sounds made will still be picked up in a sound recording, and anyone tripping a motion detector alarm will have it sound immediately. That makes containment a little easier, now that the Foundation can depend on at least physics and sound. But then you'd think a picture or photograph of an SCP-2376-1 instance would look like a normal person, right? Albeit bedridden with a rash and spasming, but a human being. You'd be wrong. And same about videos. Visual media just renders the victims as what they appear to the naked eye, a regular, harmless scarecrow. There is one way to stop the effect that SCP-2376 has on perceiving its victims, but it's not pretty. When a victim dies of the infection, they can be perceived as a human again, though of course by then it is far too late. Thankfully, being infected by SCP-2376 isn't a death sentence. The parts and symptoms of the disease are shared with regular tetanus, can be alleviated with the same treatments and remedies, though they can't be fully cured. And even if all the other symptoms go away, the largest and most anomalous aspect, the effect on others' perceptions, stays. As of testing so far, there's no way to get rid of that aspect of the disease, except, of course, death. And the Foundation has performed extensive testing with samples of SCP-2376. Murine models, they infected lab rats with the disease to see if the reaction was the same as humans and how it compared to lab rats with tetanus. The answer was extremely similar. Just like tetanus, if an SCP-2376-1 instance was pregnant when they were infected, the disease would easily transfer to the fetus and give the baby the scarecrow virus from birth. And rats that went to stage 2 also were perceived as scarecrows. Tiny little straw-stuffed scarecrows shaped like mice and stuffed with denim and straw. But unlike humans, rats and mice eat straw, which is exactly what the non-infected rats began to do to the infected ones. They were unable to perceive the rat's cries or thrashing and cannibalized it. But SCP-2376 and tetanus are bacterial infections. By eating the infected rats, the other rats also became infected, showing the disturbed Foundation researchers how this disease managed to spread unnoticed. Protocols were immediately implemented to make sure rats and mice couldn't get into the containment chambers of SCP-2376-1 instances, lest they try to start eating them and spread the disease like wildfire through Site-234. Until the medical researchers can get a better understanding of what exactly SCP-2376 is and how it affects other mammals besides crows, people, and mice, testing is ordered to continue, and several other researchers have noted how similar the effects of the virus are to other anomalies, such as SCP-2316, a pathogen that causes the entire body to lock up and stop doing everything, and SCP-2218, a number of teleporting intelligence scarecrows. Maybe SCP-2376 is the result of these two anomalies coming into contact and interacting, as some of the researchers are investigating. Or maybe it's much more nefarious. Perhaps these anomalies share a common synthetic origin, like someone trying to create an anomalous biological weapon. Or maybe it really is just a coincidence. SCP-2376 was first encountered by the Foundation in the exact place anyone would expect to find straw and scarecrows, the wide, vast cornfields of Iowa in the United States. But they didn't find them in a field of wheat or in a barn. They found them where you'd expect to find disease victims: a hospital. More specifically, Foundation agents found a number of corpses stuffed into the garbage disposal units of the hospital of a small Iowa town. The nurses and janitors at the hospital had no idea what happened. They said that some teenagers had broken in during the night and dressed a number of scarecrows in scrubs before leaving them in the wards as a prank. The staff in the morning had found and disposed of them in the trash. Knowing what we know about SCP-2376, the actual story is much more tragic. Somehow, the infection had probably gotten into a human at the hospital, and the doctors began treating it the same as they would tetanus. The doctors and nurses had also got infected, and quickly entered into stage 2 while at work. But remember, victims stop being perceived as scarecrows when they die, which means that when hospital staff threw them into the trash, they were still alive, if you can call that alive. But their thrashing and yelling couldn't be perceived by the others. Once they went into the disposal units, they quickly deteriorated and died. A deeply tragic situation all around. But how did SCP-2376 get to the hospital?
Where did it even come from? Foundation agents have a pretty solid theory. They scoured the local town for any strange events, incidents, or rumors about scarecrows, and found something much bigger than what they were expecting. A week before the corpses in the hospital were discovered, a man in the next town over had died, or more accurately, he had been killed. His wife called 911 incoherent and sobbing, and explained to the operator that she found a spare scarecrow in the garage a week before, and had nailed it up outside of the house on a post. After 3 days, she had walked outside and found, instead of the scarecrow, the body of her husband, at which point she broke down and called 911. The woman was tried for murder but acquitted on an insanity plea, based on her claims of her husband having turned into a scarecrow. The man's corpse was sent to the morgue at the hospital for an autopsy, which is probably how the infection spread to the other hospital staff, but not before the autopsy was completed and a report filed indicating cause of death: dehydration from being out in the hot sun for 3 days. Foundation staff quickly moved in and quarantined the body, confirmed the presence of SCP-2376 in the blood, and the wife confirmed her husband had symptoms similar to tetanus a few weeks ago. As for how the infection got into the man, that remains a mystery. The outbreak was considered contained by the Foundation, and since then there have been only cases here and there throughout the American Midwest, until now. An addendum to the file indicates that the Foundation has located and identified a new strain of SCP-2376, the key difference being the carrier and the effect. Rather than crows, it is transmitted by pigeons, and its origin point is in the highly urban location in Illinois. More likely than not, it's in the third largest city in the United States, Chicago. And the second difference is that instead of scarecrows, the infected are perceived as inanimate mannequins, the kind you'd see in any clothing or department store. Based off the vastly increased risk for the epidemic, the Foundation's medical department have requested that SCP-2376 be reclassified to Keter. SCP-2376 goes to show how even the diseases we don't know exist can be dangerous in more ways than just threatening our lives. So next time you see a crow scavenging for food in your front lawn, maybe think twice about getting too close to scare it away. You might just wind up on a pole in the same front yard, scaring crows away in your new straw-stuffed overalls forever. Climbers attempting to summit Mount Everest and stand on the top of the world have their work cut out for them. Dangers are everywhere on the long climb. There's a risk of extreme altitude sickness, unpredictable winds, and freezing weather. There's also the threat of avalanches, great unstoppable tidal waves of snow that can bury a person alive in seconds or strand them, leaving them to freeze to death cold and alone. It's a sad reality that not everyone that visits Everest comes back down again, and rarely does a climbing season go by that the mountain doesn't claim yet another victim. Situated on the border between China and Nepal, in a sub-range of the Himalayas of Tibet, Everest is one of the 7 wonders of the natural world. With an elevation of 29,031 feet, or 8,848 meters, Mount Everest has attracted many experienced mountain climbers over the decades. But even for the most experienced mountaineers, the ascension up its snowy slopes is far from easy. Deaths occurring on Mount Everest are nothing new, and hundreds of people are believed to have died attempting to ascend the treacherous peak. Sadly, due to the risks involved with carrying heavy loads down off the mountain, many of those who die on Everest are doomed to stay there forever, their frozen bodies serving up as their own grave markers. It's difficult enough to move your own body up and down Everest, and in many situations, bringing a body back down is simply impossible. The bodies of these lost souls are scattered all across and sometimes underneath the surface of Mount Everest. But some of those bodies are different from the others, and have a special name within the files of the SCP Foundation. They call them SCP-5140. SCP-5140 is the designation given to a number of frozen bodies which are found all across Everest. It is unclear exactly how many instances of SCP-5140 there are, though some estimates have placed the number at somewhere between 1 and 200. At present, it is unknown if all the instances of SCP-5140 are dead bodies belonging to climbers who met tragedy on the tallest mountain in the world, or if some of them are something else entirely. But while their origin is unclear, if you come into contact with a 5140 instance, there won't be any doubt that it's different from the normal body of a dead climber. That's because SCP-5140 corpses are a lot like vampires in some ways. That isn't to say that they actually are vampires. They certainly are not undead and cannot function after death. But much like a vampire traditionally drains blood to survive, these bodies drain heat. SCP-5140 corpses are ectoentropic, meaning they do not adhere to the normal laws of thermodynamics. Whenever these cadavers are exposed to sources of heat, including human body heat, the corpse will instantly drain the source of any and all thermal energy. However, the temperature of these SCP-5140 bodies remains the same, regardless of how much heat they are able to drain, staying at a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. Should any living person come into direct contact with one of the SCP-5140 corpses, the body will absorb their natural body heat, bringing their victim's own temperature down to 10 degrees Celsius and causing them to die. And once they have died, their body then becomes a new instance of SCP-5140. As a quick side note, this might feel vaguely reminiscent of another anomaly, which features seemingly inert dead bodies that are hazardous to anyone around them. SCP-2316. This anomaly is a powerful mimetic hazard consisting of a large number of drowned human corpses. These corpses are extremely hazardous to approach at even a considerable distance, as the mimetic hazard inherent to the anomaly causes those affected to recognize the bodies in the water as people they know, particularly from their childhood. Like a siren's call, the victims are lured into the water, believing that the familiar bodies are calling to them. If the victims aren't stopped, quarantined, and given amnestic treatment, they are essentially considered lost. They will walk into the water and be absorbed into the collective, becoming just another body floating in the water. While the Foundation doesn't currently believe that there is any official connection between the two anomalies, the similarities are undeniable and worth taking into consideration. Moving on. At present, it is unclear whether SCP-5140 corpses are caused by some sort of infection or parasite that spreads among the bodies uncovered at Mount Everest. If this is the case, the Foundation has yet to uncover the patient zero, the root cause of these infected bodies. There is also little to determine why a deceased body requires the absorption of heat, as well as how it achieves this and also keeps its own temperature low but not frozen. Given that interacting with an instance of SCP-5140 can be fatal, it does seem that these anomalous properties can be passed through contact and exposure, like a disease or a parasite. But there have been no observed anomalous effects among any living person visiting Mount Everest. There is a possibility that the SCP-5140 corpses have developed some form of posthumous mutation that has come as a result of being killed during an Everest avalanche and buried in the snow, their bodies starved of heat after death. After all, Everest is known for its cold temperatures, occasionally reaching as low as 1 degree Fahrenheit or minus 17 degrees Celsius, not to mention the difference in air pressure at such high altitudes, as well as frequent high-speed freezing cold winds. At the summit of Mount Everest, wind speeds can reach up to 280 kilometers per hour. That is equivalent to 175 miles per hour. And high-speed winds have even been known to catch mountain climbers off guard and send them plummeting to their deaths. Perhaps the combination of these conditions, the freezing temperature, the air pressure, and the winds have triggered some sort of change in a number of the bodies unfortunate enough to never leave the snow-covered slopes of Mount Everest. Either that, or these abandoned corpses left in such extreme cold could be the perfect home. Maybe some form of unknown and so far undetected parasite is capable of inhabiting these frozen bodies, and can spread to other living hosts by draining them of their body heat. Stranger things have certainly happened at the SCP Foundation, and that could possibly explain why anyone interacting with an SCP-5140 corpse meets the same grisly fate. Regardless of what causes these abnormalities, or why the SCP-5140 bodies have only been uncovered at Mount Everest, close contact with the corpses often result in casualties and fatalities. Naturally, this is a cost the SCP Foundation likes to avoid as often as it can, The nasty habit SCP-5140 corpses have of draining a person's body heat makes it impractical to bring them back to a Foundation research facility for testing, as does the fact that they're on the tallest mountain in the world. Instead, MTF Delta-14 have been tasked with keeping these heat-thirsty cadavers contained to Mount Everest. Mobile Task Force Delta-14, also known under the codename Winter Wonderland, is formed of a group of particularly adept mountaineers and experts in understanding and adapting to particularly brutal terrain without drawing attention to themselves. These covert operatives are tasked with periodically climbing Mount Everest and keeping SCP-5140 contained. It is this team's job to locate any new instance of SCP-5140 bodies and bury them in the snow. In doing so, the goal is to prevent any unwitting mountain climbers from stumbling upon one of these bodies and potentially becoming a new instance themselves. Meanwhile, the Foundation is pushing for both Nepal and Tibet to tighten restrictions on climbing permits. But of course, the money that Mount Everest tourism brings to these two countries has likely impeded this. According to the Foundation's file on SCP-5140, an incident occurred during one of Mobile Task Force Delta-14's annual Everest expeditions. Members of MTF Delta-14 had been traversing towards the Everest summit, encountering more and more of the SCP-5140 bodies as they made their way up the mountain. Just as they were instructed to do so, the team buried each of the frozen corpses they came across under a blanket of snow. The Delta-14s noticed, though, that there had been a much higher number of the frosty cadavers on this mission, speculating that perhaps Mount Everest's high winds had blown the snow off of ones they had already buried on previous missions. One of the Delta-14s, a man named Charlie Smith, was in correspondence with his colleagues at their base camp. Charlie reported that one of his fellow Winter Wonderlanders, Patrick, had touched one of the SCP-5140 corpses when the team reached the summit, and that he was now buried according to protocols after becoming an SCP-5140 instance himself. As they began their descent from atop Everest, Charlie sent an urgent communication to base camp, reporting that he'd uncovered 3 more SCP-5140 bodies at an abandoned campsite. Except these 3 instances were different from any he had encountered before. These corpses were somehow still moving. Attempting to hurry down the mountain, Charlie reported that a mass of SCP-5140 corpses were blocking his path and draining another one of his squad mates, Arnold, of his body heat to make him one of them. Arnold had been carrying the team's provisions, including their oxygen reserves, to combat the lack of breathable air at Mount Everest's high altitude. Charlie tried in vain to use his flare gun to clear the path, hoping to distract the now walking cadavers with a heat source, but it had no effect. His final message to base camp warned the rest of Delta-14 to not come to the summit of Everest, with Charlie frantically urging them to not let climbers anywhere near it. His final message simply stated that the mountain is danger. A rescue division of Mobile Task Force Delta-14 arrived just under 2 hours later, tracking Charlie's last known location via a GPS beacon. Strangely, despite the frantic messages from Charlie, there were no signs of any SCP-5140 instances. None of the piles of corpses he had warned them about could be seen above the snow, and certainly none of them were moving. It wasn't long before the rescue team found Charlie, though. He was dead, but not drained of heat or turned into another instance of SCP-5140. No, sadly, after bringing their fallen comrade back to base, an autopsy revealed that Charlie had died likely the same way so many other climbers on Everest had. He had suffered from a lack of oxygen. Further examination of his gear revealed that Charlie's oxygen intake valve had been damaged earlier while the squad had been climbing to the summit of Mount Everest. His teammates Arnold Hillary and Patrick Edmund were also discovered on the mountain, but only Patrick had been turned into an SCP-5140 instance. Arnold had simply died from exposure, just like Charlie. The rescue team concluded that due to lack of adequate oxygen, Charlie Smith had hallucinated the sight of SCP-5140 corpses moving and blocking his path, spending his final moments in terror as the mountain's conditions slowly killed him. The Foundation is still unsure exactly what caused his bodies to become instances of SCP-5140, or even how many of them are on Everest, but a major and troubling development has recently been made. After an increase in global temperature led to a large avalanche that resulted in a large portion of the mountain that had previously been covered in thick snow being exposed, the Foundation sent planes that were equipped with thermal imaging equipment to scan the mountain. What they found was as confusing as it was terrifying. The SCP-5140 corpses aren't just spread across the surface of Mount Everest. They are much of Everest. The mountain itself is just a huge pile of corpses, just waiting to drain the life from anyone who attempts to scale it and turn them into a permanent part of the peak. So if you were planning a trip to the Himalayas, hoping to scratch climb Mount Everest off your bucket list, maybe give it a pass. Otherwise, you might find that the climb is even colder than you were expecting. An elderly woman watches from her living room window as heavy sheets of rain fall outside. She rocks back and forth in her chair nervously.
It's been raining for days. The road is washed out. I can't get into town. Oh, what am I to do? What am I to do? She says out loud to herself.
The rocking chair creaks under her weight, but not as much as it had 3 days ago, before she ran out of food.
I am so hungry,
the old lady moans. She glances at the door that leads to her basement.
Maybe I can find something to eat down there.
She stands up. Her 90-year-old bones creak as she slowly shuffles towards the basement door. The empty chair rocks back and forth from the old woman's momentum, as if someone is still sitting in it. She opens the door and looks into the pitch-black darkness. There are no windows down there. The only light is connected to a drawstring in the middle of the room. The old woman slowly makes her way down the uneven wooden steps. When she reaches the bottom, she reaches out her wrinkled hand, groping in the darkness for the drawstring. Her hand brushes something. It feels like sticky yarn. Then she feels the legs of a spider scurry up her arm. The old woman lets out a shriek as her hand locates the string and she pulls hard. The light flickers on. It creates a dim glow, but at least she can now see what's in the basement. The string swings back and forth, casting a snake-like shadow on the far wall. The old woman scans the floor for anything to eat. A leftover tuna can, some pickled vegetables, a rat. Anything will do at this point. There is nothing there. The old woman feels her strength has been almost completely drained. She doesn't know how she'll make it back up the stairs. In desperation, she looks around the basement one last time. Her eyes fall on an old rusty saw. She pauses for a moment.
I need to eat,
she whispers. The old woman slowly walks towards the saw. She picks it up and examines it.
God gave me 2 hands for a reason,
she says, her eyes locked on the rusty blade. She places one hand on the wooden workbench that sits against the wall and grips the saw tightly with the other. The old woman takes a deep breath and brings the saw down towards her hand. Where are we going? D94322 asks the SCP agent driving the car. House on Hadley Hill, the agent responds. Well, that doesn't sound creepy at all, D94322 says as he cranes his neck to get a glimpse of the top of the mountain through the SUV window. Why don't we just play the quiet game until we get there, the agent says as he focuses on the pothole-ridden back roads of Mount Zion, Georgia. D94322 holds on tightly to the handhold above him to keep his body from slamming into the door every time they go over a big bump. They continue on for a few more minutes when a rundown house comes into view. The agent pulls off the road and stops the SUV. Here you go, he says, handing D94322 an earpiece. What am I supposed to do with this? D94322 asks. Just stick it in your ear, the agent says with just a little contempt in his voice. You don't have to be rude about it, D94322 replies as he grabs the earbud and sticks it in his ear. Hello, testing, anybody out there? Hello, D94322. Can you hear me? Says a voice in his head. Yeah. You can just call me D94 for short. D94322 is kind of a mouthful. Very well. The voice from the earbud agrees. My name is Dr. Andrews. I will be walking you through this test with SCP-4173. Alright, Doc, shall we get this party started? D94 says as he steps out of the SUV. He looks up at the house that sits atop Hadley Hill. The sky is dark, and clouds race over the mountain, as if they would rather be anywhere else but here. Here we go. D94 starts walking up the slippery hill, being careful not to fall. He reaches the overgrown walkway leading up to the house and pauses. Is there a problem? Dr. Andrews asks. No, just trying to psych myself up to go into this creepy house, responds D94. What's inside anyways? That is not your concern at the moment. But if you do exactly as I tell you, you should be in and out in no time. Whatever you say, Doc. D94 walks down the path, reaches his hand out, and grips the cool brass knob. He turns it and pushes the door open. The inside of the house smells like mothballs and decay. "All right, I'm in," he says. "Good. Head down the hallway and turn to your left. You'll see a door that leads to the basement. Let me know when you're there." D94 walks down the hallway. The old wooden floor groans under his feet. He reaches the basement door. It's slightly ajar. "Ugh, this place gives me the creeps." "Rightfully so," Dr. Andrews chimes in. "It is an old spooky house on top of an old spooky hill in the middle of nowhere. Obviously, it's going to be creepy. An old woman died here under mysterious circumstances around 20 years ago, but you don't really need to worry about that. No ghosts here, I think." "You think?" D94 shouts as he takes a step away from the basement door. "I'm just kidding. There's nothing but harmless old SCP-4173 in that house. And when has an SCP ever hurt anyone, right?" There is a long, uncomfortable pause. "Anyways, why don't you head on downstairs so we can get you out of there as soon as possible?" "Yeah, sure," D94 says as he begins his descent into the darkness. "I can't see anything. Is there a light?" "No, I think it burnt out years ago. But that's okay, I can guide you." "It's what I'm here for," says Dr. Andrews. "Walk towards the east wall, but watch your head. The ceiling is low in that corner. You'll see what you're looking for when you get there." D94 is silent for a moment. "East?" he asks. "Turn left," Dr. Andrews responds. "Oh, all right. Why didn't you say so, Doc?" D94 turns left and walks forward. After a few feet, there's a loud bang as he slams his head into the ceiling. "Son of a bitch!" "I told you to watch your head." "Yeah, thanks," says D94 as he rubs the bump forming beneath his hair. "This place is even spookier than the first floor. You know that, right?" "I promise there's nothing in that room right now that can hurt you," Dr. Andrews reassures D94. "Wait, what do you mean right now?" "Don't worry about it. Just let me know when you reach the wall, D94. After a few seconds, D94's eyes adjust to the darkness. He can just make out the damp concrete wall in front of him. It looks as if the wall is perspiring. "I'm here," he says. "Good. There's a little door, maybe 5 feet to your left. You see it?" asks Dr. Andrews. D94 turns. "Yeah, I see it. It's closed." The door itself is not very big, maybe a foot long and a half a foot wide. "Open it," says Dr. Andrew. D94 hesitates. What's in there?" "Nothing, just open it." Dr. Andrews repeats himself. "No way, man, you're lying, and I'm not opening anything until you tell me what's on the other side of that door." Dr. Andrews sighs. "We both know that you're going to do as I say, D94322. You have no other choice, unless you want to go back to that death row cell block where we found you." D94 shakes his head and rubs the bridge of his nose. Fine, he says. Dr. Andrews can hear the squeaking of hinges through the microphone on D94's earbud. "It's open, now what?" "Do you see anything?" No. There's some cobwebs and dirt, but other than that, it's just dark." D94 thinks for a moment. "Why is this little door here? Is this some, pet door or something? You have to be, I don't know, pretty small to get in there." "Agreed. Just hang tight and let me know when you hear something. We won't keep you there for long." "Hear something? Like what?" asks D94. "You'll know when you hear it," says Dr. Andrews. 5 minutes go by without a sound. Then 10, 15. The basement is damp and cold. D94 thinks he sees creatures scurrying around the floor, but he doesn't say anything because acknowledging them makes his situation more real and a lot more scary. After a half hour of waiting in silence, D94 screams, "What the heck was that?" "What was what?" Dr. Andrews is startled out of a daydream by the shouts of D94 in his ear. "Something just moved past the door. I definitely saw it. What in God's name was that?" yells D94. Dr. Andrews tries to remain calm, but he can barely contain his excitement. "The entity in the wall is why you're down there." "What do you mean? You said there wasn't anything down here." "I said there was nothing down there that could hurt you. If you follow my instructions, this will continue to be true. Can you hear anything?" asks Dr. Andrews. "No, I can't hear it." But before D94 can finish his sentence, a voice speaks from behind the wall. He can't understand what the voice is saying at first, but as his heart begins to slow and the blood stops thumping in his ears, D94 can make out her words. "Oh, thank goodness. I wasn't sure you'd be able to find me. What took you so long?" says the voice of an old woman. D94 takes a step back from the door.
There's someone on the other side of that wall?
He hisses into the microphone at Dr. Andrews. Tell it that the road is out, and you had to find another way up, says Dr. Andrews in D94's earpiece.
What? Why?
Just do it if you want to get out of there, D94, Dr. Andrews says a little impatiently. The road is out, so I had to find another way up, says D94 to the little open door in the wall.
Oh, yes, the rain washed it out. I was worried I wouldn't ever get to see another person again, being stuck up here and all. Can you see me? Asks the voice.
No, I can't, says D94.
Doc, what is on the other side of that wall? Come over here a little closer. I can't see you properly either, says the voice.
It's fine, you can get closer, just don't touch the door, Dr. Andrews says. I really don't want to do that, says D94. Do it, and you will be that much closer to getting out. I hate you, whispers D94. He slowly approaches the little door and speaks into it. Hello?
Oh, there you are.
The voice pauses as if whoever's speaking is examining D94.
I'm sorry, I can't see like I used to. It's so dark in here and it's been so long. Reach through the door and let me feel your hand so I can tell you're really there.
What? D94 steps away from the door. No way am I putting my hand in there.
Come on now, don't be rude. I just want to feel that you're there. It's been so long. Just a touch.
The voice says a little harsher than before. Screw you, lady. I'm not getting my hands anywhere near this creepy hole in the wall, says D94. He turns around and starts walking away from the little door towards the staircase leading back to the main level of the house. Before he can put his foot on the first step, D94 hears Dr. Andrews' voice screaming in his ear. Stop moving! Look, you're going to have to do it. We haven't been able to recover anyone who refuses to do what she asks. I cannot guarantee your safety unless you put your hand through that door. Are you kidding me? Shouts D94. You're telling me that sweet, creepy old lady will somehow kill me if I don't do what she asks? We're not entirely sure what happens, but you need to put your hand through that door if you want to get out of there, says Dr. Andrews. D94 turns back toward the little door and slowly approaches it. This is my nightmare, he says more to himself than anyone else. He reaches out slowly and puts his fingers through the doorway. He immediately pulls them back and steps away from the door. I really don't want to do this, D94 whispers. He steps forward again and sticks his hand all the way through the doorway. For a moment, nothing happens. All right, I've got my hand in there. Now what?
Oh, I can see you now. You're right there. Thank you for coming. Oh, it's been so long since someone came. And with a gift as well? Oh, sweetling, you're so kind to me.
Gift? What gift? D94 asks nervously.
It's so dark and lonesome, and I've just been so hungry for such a long time. Thank you, sweetling. I'll take your gift from you. You are such a rude little brat. You don't really deserve it. You've had it for too long, and you don't deserve it. It's mine now. Mine for my belly. Thank you.
What are you talking about, you psycho? D94 stutters. Suddenly, something grabs his hand and pulls him against the wall. He screams in agony as Dr. Andrews hears a wet, ripping sound coming through the microphone. It sounds as if some type of metal instrument is cutting through flesh.
Oh, God! No! Help me! Help me!
D94 screams.
Please!
Dr. Andrews hears the sound of D94's body hitting the floor as he passes out. It's quiet for a moment.
Don't worry, you ungrateful child. Don't worry. I'll fill you up too. You can have mine. I'll give it to you, sweet boy. Good boy, fill you up,
says the old woman's voice from the other side of the wall. Dr. Andrews listens as the hinges of the little door squeak and it clicks shut. He picks up the phone next to him and dials it. Go in and get him. Bring him back to Site 94 for observation. And try to keep this one alive, please. He hangs up the phone and prepares the lab for D94322 to be brought in. D94 slowly comes out of his medically induced coma 2 days after the incident with SCP-4173. He's stable, but doesn't feel great, and he can't help but sense that something is different. D94 looks at where his hand should be. There's nothing there. That crazy old lady ate my hand! He starts screaming. A medical team rushes in as red lights begin to flash and sirens blare. They attempt to restrain D94, During the struggle, D94 catches a glimpse of himself in a mirror on the far side of the room. He stops fighting for a moment. There is a growth expanding from his head. "What the heck is that?" he yells, pointing to his reflection. D94 begins to struggle again, this time much more intensely. He begins scratching at the growth on the side of his head without much success. In the process, he pushes the growth further into his skull. It penetrates his brain. D94 blacks out. The medical team ties D94 to the bed and tries to get a reading on his vitals. The growth is putting too much pressure on his brain. They rush him to the ER, but D94322 dies before he reaches the operating table. Dr. Andrews stands over the body of the deceased Class D subject. "Cut him open," he says to the doctors standing in the room. One of them pulls out a scalpel and makes an incision into the side of D94's head. "What is that?" one of the doctors says. The other bends over to get a better look. After a moment, he turns away and vomits into his face mask. Dr. Andrews picks up a pair of forceps off the table. He sticks them deep into the hole in the side of D94's head and clamps down hard. Dr. Andrews pulls out a decomposing hand. The fingers are still moving, as if trying to grab onto something. There is no explanation for how it got in there, but it is obvious that SCP-4173 played some sort of role in the phenomenon. Dr. Andrews goes back into his office to review previous case files on SCP-4173. Everyone who had put their hand into the small doorway has been pulled towards the wall and had their hand chopped off. The severed appendage never ends up being a clean cut, which leads Dr. Andrews to hypothesize the gruesome makeshift operation is done with some sort of tool with teeth. Once the hand of the victim is severed, SCP-4173 always thanks the person for their gift. She then informs them not to worry about their hand, as it will be replaced. But then something incredibly strange happens. Like with D94, a decaying hand will appear somewhere in the body, but it isn't always inside the head. In fact, depending on how polite the test subject is to the old woman behind the door, the closer to the wrist the decaying hand actually ends up. For the test subjects who are rude to the old lady, the decaying hand ends up in some pretty interesting places. "She really hated D94322, chuckles Dr. Andrews to himself. Dr. Andrews continues flipping to the back of the file on SCP-4173. The SCP Foundation doesn't quite know how it happens, but people who refuse to offer their hand to SCP-4173 suffer a worse fate than those who surrender to the old lady. In every case where a subject tries to get away from the small door, some inexplicable force seems to grab them from behind and drag them through the tiny opening. In these cases, there is nothing left of the test subject. It is likely fatal, as a human is much smaller than the opening itself. So the only way a body could fit through the doorway is if every bone is broken and every muscle compressed to a quarter of its actual size. "I'm not sure which is worse," Dr. Andrews says aloud as he closes the file on SCP-4173. He glances at the picture paperclip to the front of the manila folder depicting the tiny doorway. He can't quite pinpoint why, but the fact that the door slowly closes after the old woman gets what she needs from her victims sends chills down his spine. The words of the old woman echo in his head. "Don't worry, I'll fill you up too. You can have mine. I'll give it to you. Sweet boy, good boy, fill you up." Now, many children across the English-speaking world grew up hearing Mother Goose nursery rhymes about mice running up clocks, old women living in shoes, and one unfortunate egg by the name of Humpty Dumpty. But have you ever heard the rhyme about the crooked man? Most of us who heard that particular poem remember it like this. There was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house. A little bit odd, but hey, most nursery rhymes are. When have you ever seen a little girl sitting on a tuffet eating some curds and whey? What even is a tuffet? Honestly, what are curds and whey? Let's just move on. Residents of the sleepy English hamlet of Tenby in Oxfordshire hear a more menacing version of the rhyme about the crooked man, sung as a song on playgrounds, shared in hushed tones when the grown-ups aren't listening. It goes like this. There lived a crooked man who made a crooked deal. He kept a crooked cane and his catch in crooked creel. He stole a crooked child who cried a crooked squeal,
and that crooked little man was broken on the wheel. It sounds just as inscrutable as any other nursery rhyme, but there is a dark tone to it that seems a bit out of place, especially when you compare it to the other somewhat cheery version. This creepy alternative to the Crooked Man nursery rhyme seems to only be found in the town of Tembe, and unfortunately for the residents of that town, there is a deadly truth behind its words. Many years ago, the SCP Foundation became aware of a mysterious pattern in this unassuming town. Every 12 years, over a period of roughly 70 days, something horrible would happen to townspeople who happened to be alone and indoors after dark. When they were discovered by a neighbor, a family member, a friend, or even the police, they would be unresponsive, suffering from full-body paralysis, or appearing to be effectively brain-dead. This was not the most unusual aspect of the phenomenon, though. The victims were all grotesquely transformed, their long bones covered in dozens of compound fractures, combined with excess cartilage and osseous tissue. Their limbs would become distended, stretched, and deformed into long, gnarled appendages like the limbs of an ancient tree. One of the recovered victims had a forearm measured at over 2.4 meters long. Another had to be placed in a specially outfitted hospital bed, as his spine and legs had stretched to the point where he was 12.5 meters tall. Local police and doctors alike were left scratching their heads. What had happened to these people? Clearly something horrible had been done to them, but there was no actual evidence of a crime. No one had been murdered, and there was no evidence of forced entry at any of the victims' homes. There was, however, one other piece to the crooked puzzle. Just before a victim was found, their place of residence would visibly degrade and warp, the structure itself breaking in places until portions collapsed in or became slanted. Roofs would tilt at an unsafe angle, chimneys would fold over, and door frames would twist until no ordinary person could pass through them safely. This happened every 12 years for decades, and none of the people of Tembe could do anything about it. In fact, they rarely ever so much as spoke of it, terrified of admitting the truth of their town's curse in so many words. Instead, they spoke about the phenomenon in innuendo, meaningful glances and pleas to keep loved ones company at night, and through a simple children's rhyme. One doctor tasked with treating survivors of the horror decided to do something as the 12-year mark began to approach once more. He reached out to a researcher he had known years ago, a man who specialized in the unexplained, things that modern medicine had no answer for. This man had left medicine behind and was now working for the SCP Foundation. At the time of contact, there were approximately 6 months to go until the phenomenon would begin to strike once more. The Foundation needed to act quickly in order to collect more information and hopefully find a way to stop the terror of Tembe once and for all. With about a month to go until the danger would reappear, a member of D-Class personnel referred to as D-209 was placed in a Foundation-owned house in town. Audio and visual equipment were installed throughout the house in order to monitor it for any anomalous activity and to make sure D-209 remained at his post. For the first month of his stay, D-209 did not experience anything unusual. He spent his time drinking tea, baking pies, and catching up on his reading. He even thanked the Foundation for the unexpected staycation. Unfortunately, on his 43rd day in Tembe, things changed. As D-209 sat in bed reading a novel by the lamplight, the camera feed in the living room began to glitch. A vertical distortion appeared with a jagged pattern that began to make its way across the room from the front door. It was as if something was coming inside, but the camera could not pick up its image. The distortion continued through the hallway until the camera placed there cut out entirely. D-209 suddenly closed his book as the sound of scratching came from the floor below. He began to slowly climb out of bed, listening for further sounds as the entity continued to make its way through the house toward him. Movement was apparent on the video feed, but there was too much interference for any image of the creature to be made out. D-209 froze in his tracks as he heard footsteps, slow and certain, coming up the stairs toward him. He ran to the window, attempting to pry it open and make an escape, but it would not budge. With increasing desperation, he grabbed his bedside lamp and threw it at the window, attempting to shatter the glass. The lamp broke apart, but the window remained stubbornly intact. As he scrambled for an escape route, something knocked at his bedroom door. D-209 called out toward the door. "Who is it? Who's there?" But there was no response. "Identify yourself!"
Still, whatever stood on the other side said nothing. Holding the remains of the lamp in one hand as a makeshift weapon, D-209 slowly reached for the doorknob and opened the door. With a sudden pop, every light bulb in the vicinity burst, including Foundation-provided floodlights positioned outside of the house. There was the sound of snapping, and then an agonized scream. The camera adjusted to the lack of light in the room, allowing for a clear image of D-209. He was wailing and holding his right arm, which appeared to be broken just above the elbow. The arm began to stiffen and elongate, indicating impossibly fast bone growth.
Screw this! You're not taking me! I'm getting out of here alive!
He yelled, running down the hallway. He collapsed as another snapping sound echoed throughout the hall.
My leg's broken! Send help, please!
He called to someone, anyone who might be watching the feed. Slowly, painfully, he pulled himself to his feet. He lifted his right arm to the camera, showing that it had been broken again below the elbow, pointing in the opposite direction of the first break.
What are you doing? Help me!
He screamed.
It doesn't even hurt anymore! That can't be right! I don't know what's happening to me!
As he continued to yell at the cameras, he limped towards the stairs, attempting to make his way down to the first floor. He missed a step, lost his balance, and fell all the way down. 12 loud snaps were heard as he went. When he landed on the ground, his bones were broken in several other places, only to be immediately set where they had broken as he screamed. He dragged himself into the living room, battling against his own body, which had become something foreign to him. His arms were growing longer, now around 2 meters long, and his legs stretched out of the camera's view, presumably into the hallway. Suddenly, he stopped crawling, his eyes widening.
No. No.
He whimpered before suddenly being dragged backwards out of the camera's view. Due to the presence of the entity interfering with the cameras, all visibility was lost at this point. There was, however, still a live audio feed. The microphones picked up an hour of snapping and screaming until D-209 eventually went quiet. Then, all that could be heard was a wet, sucking sound, followed by a thumping. Meanwhile, at the hospital, 27 other victims of the entity were lying in hospital beds. As D-209 met his unfortunate fate, all of the hospitalized victims began to experience seizures at the same time and seized for several minutes. 5 patients were killed and 2 researchers were injured in the chaos. After the incident at the hospital, reports of a seismic event at the edge of town began to circulate. Because there had been no actual earthquake in the area, the research team realized that this disturbance had to be somehow related to the phenomenon. They planned to investigate, in order to learn more about the entity behind it all, which they had now officially designated SCP-783, the Crooked Man. A team of personnel were sent to investigate the site of the seismic event, only to find a group of Tembe townsfolk clustered around the area in a field at the south of town. The crowd refused to let the researchers through and would not budge until one researcher, Agent Collins, pulled out her firearm and fired a shot into the air. The sound frightened the crowd, and they realized this mysterious foundation really meant business. Where the crowd had been, Agent Collins could see toes, unnaturally long, crooked toes, poking up out of the ground. They were going to need some help and a lot more shovels to uncover this mystery. By the next day, a dig team had uncovered a mass grave filled with victims of SCP-783. There were dozens of elongated bodies spread throughout the 5-meter-wide hole, stacked on top of each other with their heads facing down and their arms outstretched towards the bottom of the pit. Their limbs had grown around each other, twisting together to the point where they could not be removed one at a time. While trying to collect a tissue sample from one of the bodies, researcher Singer lost his balance as the ground beneath him gave way and he fell. He attempted to find a foothold and climb back up, but fell through the gnarled arms and down into the pit. Thinking quickly, Agent Collins grabbed a rope and tied it around her waist. She would lower herself down into the grave and would signal when she was ready for them to pull her out. Agent Collins descended into the pit, over 20 meters down, before she signaled for the team to pull her back out. Then she told them what she had seen. There was something down there, the entrance to another location beneath all of the bodies. Someone asked if there was any sign of researcher Singer. Collins shook her head, face growing pale. She hadn't seen him down there.
he was gone. Agent Collins was granted a temporary leave of absence, and a D-Class, D-2172, was selected for further exploration of the anomalous mass grave. He was outfitted with a retractable harness, communication and video equipment, as well as a photo-ionization detector, a Geiger counter, a basic survival kit, a firearm, and ammunition. D-2172 was then lowered into the pit via a crane. After 12 meters of descent, there was no longer any visible light inside the pit, and D-2172 switched on his headlamp. A few moments later, D-2172 began tugging on the tether, demanding to be lowered more quickly. When asked why, he insisted, "Someone just touched my back." At 18 meters down, D-2172 began to feel a sense of confusion and dizziness, unable to tell which direction he was going. At this point in the pit, gravity had inverted, forcing D-2172 to climb upward in order to continue moving down as he crossed into another world. There was daylight visible here again, as D-2172 climbed out from within the mass of bodies. There he found a seemingly identical version of the town of Tembe. He was instructed to take soil samples, and the monitoring researcher noticed something odd on the video feed. There were marks in the dirt around the grave that appeared to have been made by fingers pulling across the ground. They decided not to relay this to D-2172. After the soil samples came up normal, D-2172 was instructed to walk to a nearby cottage and look for any sign of the missing researcher Singer. He knocked on the door, and with no answer let himself in. He saw no one inside, and began to walk through. In the bedroom on the wall, there was a charcoal sketch of a humanoid figure holding a staff of some kind. Command ordered him to approach the drawing, but he protested, saying he felt incredibly uncomfortable looking at it. He relented and began to approach, but as he did, the quality of the video feed began to degrade until it was filled with static. D-2172 was then permitted to leave the cottage and further explore this copycat village. While walking further into the village, D-2172 spotted a work boot on the ground. He picked it up and found it was a match for the one researcher Singer had been wearing. He followed the path to another house, the door of which was wide open. He walked inside to find signs of a struggle, an overturned couch and table, a hole in the wall, the broken pieces of a lamp scattered on the floor. The kitchen was just as much of a mess, and as he investigated it further, he found a pool of blood on the floor, with significant blood splatter on the walls and counter. It looked like someone had been attacked with a weapon, likely a knife. Indeed, as he looked, D-2172 spotted a butcher's block with only one empty slot, the one that should have held a meat cleaver. The investigation led him to a locked door, covered in scratches. He broke it down and nearly fell down the stairs into the darkened basement. Instructed to head down into the basement, D-2172 switched on his headlamp, drew his weapon, and descended into the darkness. The basement was empty except for a bloody meat cleaver and a piece of pant leg caught inside an exhaust vent leading out of the house. The pants resembled those worn by Singer before his fall. D-2172 peered into the vent for a closer look, but was startled by the sight of something scuttling out of sight. Whatever it was fleshy, and it was not something he cared to see more of. D-2172 continued on his expedition, walking north and away from the town limits of Tembe. Somehow, in spite of this, he wound back up at the south side, where he had emerged from the pit. But something was different. There were no bodies, no open grave, and no tethered harness that he had taken off when he climbed out. He was trapped. The harness had not been retracted, so where had it gone? Command could not determine its exact location, but proposed that D-2172 had entered another anomalous area and was not, in fact, back where he started. He was instructed to follow the road back, retracing his steps until he wound up at the pit again. As he walked, he commented that he had not yet seen a single living thing in this place. Then, as he heard the sound of rustling leaves, he turned toward it to find the corpse of an SCP-783 victim. He turned back to continue on his way, only to see another victim sprawled across the road. He drew his weapon then, listening as the rustling began again. He spun around to look at the body behind him and found that it had stretched longer, growing closer to him. Behind him, the other body began to snap as well. He turned to fire his weapon and saw that this other body had stretched its neck, its head at eye level, only a meter away from his own face. He fired several rounds, but the corpse did not respond. Ignoring orders, D-2172 took off running into the woods, leaving the road behind. He stopped to catch his breath, sat down, and reloaded his firearm. After eating a quick MRE and informing command of his whereabouts, he set back off on his journey through the forest. After 14 minutes of walking, he began to feel movement under the ground. Short, sharp bursts of motion reverberating through the earth. He could also hear a thumping sound coming from beneath him. On the video feed, Command saw what appeared to be a silver birch tree lifting out of sight, then dropping down back into the forest, shaking the ground on impact. D-2172 was instructed to approach the object, as Command quickly realized that this was no tree. As he approached, another similar object landed near him. He fired his weapon at it, and blood began to dribble from the wound, a scream ringing out high above him. Not knowing what else to do, he ran as fast as he could, begging for help from Command, for someone to do something to get him out of there. As D-2172 ran out of the forest, making his way back to town, another one of the long, pale objects knocked him onto his back. He looked up, now able to see what it was without the trees in his way. When he saw it, he couldn't help but scream. It was Researcher Singer, or at least it had once been Researcher Singer. He had become something else, something unthinkable. His body was up in the sky, balancing on enormous, impossibly long fingers. The creature that had once been Singer shrieked, lifting a finger and preparing to bring it down on D-2172. He fired several shots, but none hit, so again he turned and ran. He reached the main road and kept running, tasting bile in the back of his throat and feeling his lungs begin to burn. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, the creature would grab him in those awful fingers, and he didn't want to think about what would happen next. Then he saw it, the pit, the bodies, his way out. He sprinted toward the pit, almost there, when a screech rang out and a massive finger knocked him aside. The video feed was lost, with only the sound of D-2172 screaming and running away. After this, D-2172 was considered lost. An attending researcher, Dr. Peterson, ordered that the team pull his harness back out. Agent Collins protested, saying they had no evidence of D-2172's death. Peterson relented, and they waited for the signal. Eventually, it came. 2 tugs on the tether, D-2172 asking to be pulled out. But when they pulled the tether, an empty harness emerged. Something was caught on it, holding it in the pit as the team tried to draw it out. It was D-2172's hand, gripping the harness as hard as it could. The harness broke free from his grasp, and his hand flailed, searching for his chance at escape. Another D-Class rushed to help, grabbing a hold of 2172's hand. Another D-Class joined in, along with Dr. Lafayette and Private Aoude, and the group worked together to pull the fallen man from the pit. Only as they pulled, they realized that only his arm had come out, and it was continuing to come. More and more and more of his arm, stretching out to 3 meters in length, bending and snapping at gruesome angles. They were too late after all. He was already gone. Despondent, the group released him, and he sank back down into the pit with the rest. There is currently no way for the Foundation to remove the crooked man from Tembe for containment. Instead, they must maintain a strong presence in the town, monitoring the community via a temporary Site 5. This area includes 2 houses and a building near the local hospital. Their Foundation officers will track any signs of SCP-783 activity, as well as continue to research the entity's nature
and any potential weaknesses it may have. In the event that SCP-783 becomes active, all of its victims must be removed from the site of the attack. Their bodies must be incinerated, and they will be added to the case file. For now, there is not much anyone can do but wait and see, because the cycle isn't broken yet. It's only a matter of time. The Crooked Man is coming back to do his crooked deeds. Be thankful the Foundation knows what everybody needs. If you want to stay yourself, protect your muscle, flesh, and bone, then you'd better heed this warning. Don't stay home at night alone. Now go check out SCP-2316, The Bodies in the Water, and SCP-966, Sleep Killer for more unsettling anomalies from the SCP Foundation.